Diversity action plans to improve enrollment of participants from underrepresented populations in clinical studies. Guidance for industry. Section 8. Requesting diversity action plan waivers.
FDA anticipates that submission of a diversity action plan as discussed in this guidance will be possible in most cases. However, under Section 505(z)(4) and Section 520(g)(9)(c) of the FD&C Act, as amended by Section 3601 of FDORA, FDA may waive the requirement to submit a diversity action plan or any part thereof, either on the agency's initiative or at a sponsor's request, if certain criteria are met.
While the appropriateness of a waiver is a case-specific determination and will depend on factors relevant to a specific development program, FDA will evaluate whether any of the following statutory criteria are satisfied when considering whether a waiver is appropriate.
A waiver is necessary based on what is known, or what can be determined about the prevalence or incidence in the US, of the disease or condition for which the new drug or device is under development, including in terms of the patient population that may use the drug or device.
B. Conducting a clinical investigation in accordance with a diversity action plan would otherwise be impracticable, or C. A waiver is necessary to protect public health during a public health emergency.
FDA may grant a waiver from the requirement to submit a diversity action plan, full waiver, or a waiver for any requirement of a diversity action plan, partial waiver. Given the importance of increasing enrollment of historically underrepresented populations in clinical research, including in clinical studies of drugs and devices, in order to detect potential differences in product performance and improve the generalizability of the results, full or partial waivers from the requirements around the submission of a diversity action plan will only be granted in rare instances.
If FDA determines that the statutory criteria for granting a waiver are met and that granting a waiver on the agency's initiative is appropriate, such as the need to protect public health during a public health emergency, FDA will notify interested parties through appropriate channels. For example, to the extent permitted under applicable disclosure law, FDA may consider public communications and/or post relevant information on FDA's website regarding the decision to issue the waiver. Sponsors should consider the following in determining whether to submit a request for a full or partial waiver.
FDA generally does not intend to waive the requirement to submit a diversity action plan even if the disease or condition under study is relatively homogeneous with respect to race, ethnicity, sex, or age group. If supported by relevant data and information, sponsors should indicate in their rationale supporting their enrollment goals why the targeted population is homogeneous.
FDA is required to issue a written response granting or denying a waiver request within 60 days of receiving such request. As such, sponsors should submit requests for a waiver, if warranted, as early as feasible, and no later than 60 days before the diversity action plan is required for submission. FDA strongly encourages sponsors to discuss plans to request a waiver early in the planning stages of the clinical study or clinical development program.
Sponsors should request a waiver early enough to allow sufficient time for preparation and submission of the diversity action plan as required, should FDA deny the waiver request. Sponsors should not submit waiver requests less than 60 days before the diversity action plan is required.
As noted above, sponsors may decide to include different enrollment goals across multiple planned Phase 3 or other pivotal studies. FDA recognizes that under these circumstances, the enrollment goals for each individual study may not be fully reflective of the enrollment goals across all studies. In these cases, sponsors should not seek a waiver for each study. Rather, in their diversity action plans, sponsors should specify how the enrollment goals are expected to be met across the development program and provide a rationale for the enrollment goals for a specific study.
For drugs, a waiver request should be submitted electronically to the IND in ECTD Module 1. 12.5, request for a waiver and should be submitted to the IND application under which the clinical study that is subject to the requirement of a diversity action plan will be conducted. The accompanying cover letter should include Diversity Action Plan Waiver Request, written in large, bolded type. The waiver request submission should include the following information: IND number, applicable clinical study name or identification number, and a justification for the waiver request, including relevant data and information.
For devices, a waiver request should be submitted as a standalone submission with an accompanying cover letter that includes Diversity Action Plan Waiver Request written in large, bolded type. The waiver request should include the following information: submission numbers if available, information about the device including a device description and proposed intended use, the applicable clinical study, the type of marketing submission that the clinical study is intended to support, and a justification for the waiver request, including relevant data and information.
Follow Diversa Trials on LinkedIn, YouTube, and your other favorite social media platforms. Also, be sure to check out our other FDA DAP draft guidance videos. Thanks for watching.